This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Discussions at the Roundtable. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome Lisa Barnes. Ms. Barnes is the owner and appraiser of Rare Art Appraisals, an art consultancy with a broad range of offerings ranging from wine collection valuation to expert witnessing. She has over 28 years of experience in appraisals, curation, and conservation of art. Ms. Barnes, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Noah.
Of course. Let's jump into it. So you've built a successful worldwide practice in art appraisals. Were you always a fan of fine art? How did you first get into it?
I'll give you the Reader's Digest version.
Sure.
I was always passionate about art, but when I first went to college in Boston, I thought I'd be a psych major. And then I was able to study in Paris and took my first course in art history and just became passionate about the business, and tried to navigate myself through those processes. And thereafter, I was studying at the Louvre in the Jeu de Paume, and I came back to Boston and I applied to Oxford, and I met a mentor that said, you really should study at Sotheby's. They have a great program. So I went from there and came back to the US after studying in London. And I started an art consultancy business. I advised corporations spending money in art investment firms. Then I moved to New Zealand. And then I found myself, after the fact, a lot of people, when corporations weren't investing, appraisal business was something that is always needed. From an insurance point, estate, and my expert witness developed through there. 80% of my business is expert witness. Art crime, scams, and schemes is the second largest crime in the world. So I found myself in this very interesting predicament and got involved with a lot of interesting cases.
Wow, that is quite a story. You've really gone to a lot of different places and moved around and learned from a lot of different organizations and institutions. That's fascinating. Art is it is a very broad category, and your Rare Art Appraisals really is you do have a broad practice there. In your industry, what does it mean to be quote unquote an expert, and how do you remain an expert? How do you stay up with everything?
Well, there's several things. You need to have what's called USPAP. So the IRS accepts your appraisals. Just like accountants and attorneys, you do have to upkeep if you're legit. So I keep up with that, doing coursework all the time. I mean, one can never perfect in this area and be perfect. It's an ongoing thing. I just like wine appraisals, I started doing that about 10 years ago. I did a wine course at Christie's in London with a gentleman that was the only person that was able to taste what they found was Thomas Jefferson's wines.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, it's mentoring people and keeping on top of it, but also being credentialed, being ethical. Being an expert, you need to always tell the truth, be prepared, testify, not be sloppy, lazy, or arrogant. And that's how you can be a successful expert witness. And, just like anything, I mean, one learns through a period of time. But yeah, so that's a little bit of that.
When did you first become an expert witness? So you had already opened your consultancy. Did you get a call out of the blue, or is that something that you just started marketing actively?
I was, somebody reached out to me to be an expert witness, and yeah, it was a process. And I'm not saying, you can walk into a courtroom or be an expert witness, especially in my area, that's, very unique. So I got called in, and then I found myself, um, a lot of people were calling upon me because I wasn't intimidated by the court, the jury, and that whole process. And I think that's important to understand your limitations, the quality of your work, your due diligence, etc. That's where I kind of developed that part of my practice.
Sure, and you have developed it. So tell me, bring me back to the beginning when you were very first contacted. You had never done this before. What was that like? How was the preparation for it? Did it go to court the first time? Did you just write a
Yes,
report? What was it like?
it's a funny story. I was working in Las Vegas, and I had a friend of mine that called me, and they said, well, these guys look a bit shady. And I had a private office in Vegas in a secretary, and two guys show up to my house, to my office, and they're like, hey, we got this Picasso. We think it was stolen. Here's the police report from New York. Can you look at it? Blah, blah, blah. And we think it's worth $20 million. Um, so at that period of time, doing my due diligence, I reported it to IFAR, which is called, it's a directory that lists all the stolen art. And
Mhm.
mind you, they gave me the police report. It was stolen.
Oh
And
boy.
wanted me to sell it for 12 million. So that was kind of my first case. And then I got a call. It was on TV. The FBI and U.S. attorney called me and said, would you be willing to be an expert witness in this case, establish the value? It was apparently stolen from an apartment in New York.
Tell me about the preparation in that first case. So
So
you're on
that
this big crazy case, and the lawyers call you, and then you meet with them, and then what happens?
I got a call from the FBI in Phoenix on this case. These guys disappeared. They were ex-mob. And there was a backstory to it that this was taken from Picasso, given to the Count of Spain, and he brought it to the New York apartment and said it was stolen by a priest out of a window. And then I got called in. The FBI, we had a sting operation at a private airport. They collected the painting and the two gentlemen's. And so the painting was supposed to be valued at 12 million. Again, backstory.
Sure.
I worked with the FBI and the US attorney and traveled with an FBI agent, met um, Picasso's one of his lovers who was in San Diego and looked at it and was like, doesn't look good. Then we found a painting under the painting. I went to a conservator. So there's a lot of process. The end of the story is the Mona Lisa of Picasso will never be known because
Ooh.
there was a painting under the painting.
Wow, intrigue. While you're on the case, I want to talk about, some of what it was to be an expert, some of the mechanical stuff. Did you do any, like, I don't know, mock cross examinations, anything like that?
That
Were you
case
coached?
didn't end up going to trial
Ah, I see.
because
Okay.
it was confiscated. They went to
Sure.
jail. The funniest part of the whole thing was if it was worth 12 million, they would have been in jail for a long time, and they only went for like 6 months because the
Huh.
value was $500.
So this was your first case. You jump in, really hit the ground running on this one. Going forward, what are some of the more, mundane sorts of things that you've done? Have you had depositions? Have you been cross-examined, or has it been mainly
Yes.
report writing? You have. Okay. So
Yes.
what's that been like?
When you're dealing with that, I mean, it depends how serious the case is. I
Sure.
think your relationship with the attorneys is really important. I was on a very high profile case in Chicago um, that Sears was suing on a Calder case, and we finally settled after 3 years. But in those types of situations, I think it's very important to be very informed, educate the attorneys because the attorneys don't know anything about art. Most of them are like, I got this in my house, but they don't understand the value. I mean, my posture as an expert witness is I always walk in and I like to inform people and not be polluting, and just say, let's talk and I'll educate. And I can tell you on several cases, judges were always like, could you stay longer? This is so interesting, because they get an education too. I think in the art world, because perhaps you don't know, but there's only about 1,200 certified fine art appraisers in the
Oh,
US.
wow. Okay. So
So
it is
we're a
it's a
very
niche.
small, group. Many appraisers don't want to do experts. So when you go into a case, it's extremely important to be knowledgeable, be simplistic, understanding, comprehensive with your evaluation of the work of art, and how can you justify that value.
I want to jump back before I forget to something that you mentioned, which is you taking a very proactive approach.
Mhm.
You tell your lawyer this, you tell a judge this. Tell me a little bit more about that. Um, how is it? How do you manage to push back, on an attorney or a judge or somebody without becoming intimidated by them? Because it can be
Um,
intimidating for a newer expert. That's something that I hear that people, who are kind of new, worry about is where can I draw the line? What am I allowed to say? When can I push back?
and I'll be honest. I mean, I had one case in Tucson in Superior Court, and the opposing counsel was trying to intimidate me, and I was in tears, and the judge fined him and kicked him out.
Good.
So I mean, I think we learn things as we go through the process. Can you redirect that question?
Sure, no problem. Just, what are the techniques that you can use to of for a pushing back, if your attorney, what you were saying that your attorney doesn't necessarily know a lot about art. So
Correct.
how do you go about saying, what, you're actually wrong about this. This is how it actually is. Can that be intimidating to try and push back on an attorney like that? Or do you find that they're pretty receptive to your input?
I think they're receptive because one, as an expert witness, it's very important that you have your resume and your credentials, accurate,
Hmm.
and that they can see that your judgment is, like right there. And sometimes, I've used visuals in a court or in a depot and be like, here's the chart, this is the value, here is, what you need to consider, but one also cannot be biased. And that's
Okay.
really important.
Are there situations where you find yourself in a case where your lawyer is kind of trying to push you to say something in some way, but you're afraid that it may implicate you and may make you appear to be biased and impeach you?
My integrity is, the most valuable thing I have, I don't feed into that.
Speaking of ethics and integrity, when you're first vetting cases, well, first of all, do you turn down cases regularly, or do you pretty much take most of what comes to you?
It depends, but I do evaluate it. But I'm very clear that, I'm not going to be prejudiced about a case. I'm going to
Hmm.
analyze it. And unfortunately, in the art world, I mean, there's so much fake and forgery.
Hmm.
Even in wine collections that I praise, there's a lot of fraudulent that as well. So one has to make sure you clearly define, your posture when you go into a case. I write that, in writing, as well as I represent myself, that I have a strict code of ethics I have to follow.
You find that when you're first vetting a case, when they first call, that somebody sets off a red flag, with any regularity, like, oh, they're going to try and make me do something unethical. I better not take this case. Is that something that happens to you?
Yes, there's three things that are really important in your due diligence: being an expert, being sincere, um, investigating and checking other people out too. I do background checks
Oh, okay.
because you don't always want to compromise your reputation in lieu of somebody getting, a settlement or something like that.
I want to jump back to you. You had said that you were brought nearly to tears once, in a case. Is that
Mhm.
something that that your lawyer could have better prepared you for, or is that something that you've just had to learn to separate your expertise and what you're doing from the case at hand and not take it personally? How do you deal with that?
I mean, that was a tough one, and that was a couple of years ago, but now I'm a lot, I perhaps my skin is a little harder because I've gone through so many of them.
Sure.
But I think one has to like reach out and, be appropriate to the attorney that you're working with. And, again, follow in what the engagement letter says, how you approach, the value, how you approach the situation. I've been in depots and sometimes they're like, you know, whatever, we're going to throw this out. Um,
Sure.
but I think as an appraiser, you know, we have certain checklists and we need to follow that as our due diligence and not be manipulated by what attorney might want you to say to manipulate the other side. And that's
Sure.
where it gets like a little gray, I guess. Does that sound right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You said that there's only, what did you say, 1,500 or so appraisers
Certified.
working, right,
Yeah.
certified appraisers in this field. So I take it that you would probably come across occasionally experts on the other side of a case that you're familiar with. Is that right?
Correct.
And how does that relationship affect your performance during a case? Are you ever a little bit worried about, wow, I don't want to like say anything super mean to upset
To
this other
throw
person
someone
who's
under
in
the
my
bus.
same field? Right. Yeah, to throw them under the bus or whatnot. And I've heard,
No.
some of these kind of niche fields can be like that a little bit, and that can be something that's a little bit of a struggle. Is that something that you found to be difficult?
No, I mean, again, it's just understanding, what your posture should be going into each case, defining your relationship and not getting over the top. Um, I've been very privileged with a lot of attorneys I work with all over the country, like a big case in Chicago where we would sit for hours and just talk, and I would prep them, they would prep me. And
Hmm,
so it didn't create this really negative field. Um,
sure.
so no, I mean, I don't let it affect me emotionally. Like when I'm an
Okay.
expert witness, I follow, you know, let's go outside, let's talk about this, let's do this. So um and I mean, I'm happy to say as an expert witness over the past 18 years, I've won every case on behalf of my clients. So
Th-
it's a
It,
pretty
it's
good
interesting.
margin.
Sure, sure. It's that's an interesting thing you bring up. That's actually, before we wrap up, that is one of the questions that I like to ask every guest, because everybody has
Right.
a different take on this, which is how important is winning to you? And I mean that in terms of, do you only take cases which you think are winnable? And then once you've taken a case, do you follow it all the way through to the end and check in and, see, even after your part is done, do you continue to follow it and see if it is won or lost?
In answer to your question, yes. I follow through the case. I'm on a retainer or whatever it is, and I do correspond with my client. Do I take on cases that I feel could be a little bit shady? No. I definitely would not take a case on that I feel there could be manipulation or something shady. So all the cases I take on are, with legit good attorneys that I feel the relationship is copacetic. And that's
Sure,
really important. The legal field and the art field are two different things, like I said. And
sure.
I mean, if I feel something isn't comfortable, I won't. No.
Now, that aside, though, say that it is something that you're very comfortable with. It's right in your area of expertise.
Right.
But the case isn't one. The facts just didn't turn out, or the jury just didn't turn out on your side. Is that something that's important to you? Is that record, that win-loss record, something that's important to you?
Honestly, I haven't had a case that lost. So
You haven't been in that
I
in that
would,
position
I
yet.
mean, if I did, I could have a gripe, but no, I mean, all my cases we've won.
Wow.
So I'm not sure how I would respond to that. I would be sad, but if ethically there was something that bridged, a situation, I wouldn't want to again compromise my integrity. So
Of
yeah.
course. Of course. One final question. You had said that you take a retainer. Billing, something else I like to ask about. Do you recommend, in addition to the retainer, do you prefer hourly or project-based billing?
You can't do project because USPAP, you can't charge a fee. You have to charge hourly or daily.
Ah, interesting. So that's already taken care of for
USPAP
you.
is standards and the IRS has established it. Yeah.
Sure,
So to
sure.
be certified, you have to follow that criteria. So
Before
I
we
mean,
go
there's a
on.
lot of people that will say they're appraisers out there and whatever. Um, but if they're not following the guidelines or keeping up with their certifications, they can get hit bad.
Now,
It's
does that affect your billing for expert witness billing, or is
no,
that
I
only
mean,
for
my
appraising?
billing system is the same.
It's the
I,
same regardless. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Before we wrap up, do you have any just general advice, last advice to either expert witnesses who are just getting started in different fields, or to lawyers that work with expert witnesses?
My advice would be is make sure you check out, an appraiser's background, make sure they're certified, make sure they have experience, make sure they're able to execute a proper performance, I guess you could call it. That's
Sure.
what, because it's kind of like being an actor sometimes. You got to know what you're saying. You're on stage, you got to look good, you got to know what to wear. um there's a lot of things that go into all of that. It's not easy because art is extremely unique. I think you have to be invested in what you're telling your clients or the attorneys. And like I said, I've been in courts and judges have said like, "Oh my God, could you stay all day? This is so interesting." Educate, keep your words simple, appeal to people. And I've been an expert in jury trials and your language, your body posture. I mean, there's a lot of components um into being an expert witness. It's not just the way you look or the way that you talk, but it's how you handle it.
So making
Um
it accessible to your audience is something that you find super important.
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Miss Barnes, for joining me here today. I really
Oh,
appreciate
I
all of
loved
the
it.
sage advice.
Oh, Noah, I love working with you.
Thank you so much also to our listeners for joining us at another discussion at the roundtable. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Discussions at Roundtable. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcast or your favorite listening apps.